Let's talk about factoring and simplifying cube roots. So remember, when you cube something, let's say 2 cubed, that just means that you're multiplying a number by itself 3 times. Okay, whatever the number on the exponent is tells you how many times you're multiplying that number by itself. So 2 cubed is 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. 4 cubed gives me 64, because it's 4 times 4 times 4, which gives me 64. Cube rooting is like square rooting, except you're figuring out what cubed gives you that number. Now the symbol for a cube root is very similar to a square root in that it's that check with a tail. The only difference is there's going to be a 3 inside of that check. Okay, so if I ask you what is the cube root of a number like 216, you're going to figure out what times itself gives me, or what cubed gives me 216. Well, you already know how to square root, break it down into factors. What about cube rooting? Does it work the same way? Well, yeah. If I break down cube roots, I'm thinking of the same deal. Okay, I need to figure out what times itself gives me 216, so I'm going to break it down into factors. Now, it would be helpful if you knew the numbers 1 through 10 cubed. Okay, because look at what happens. I'm just going to take something simple. 1 cubed is 1 times 1 times 1, that gives me 1. 2 cubed, we just did, gives me 8. 3 cubed is 3 times 3 times 3, that gives me 27. And so on and so forth. Well, square root of 216, let's go back to this. If I factor this out, I'm going to go a little simple. I'm going to do 216 cube root of that, or sorry, 216 divided by the cube root of 2 and the cube root of 108. Now, I don't know what the cube root of 2 is. I don't really know what the cube root of 108 is. So I'm going to divide that again. 108 divisible by 2. So cube root of 2 and the cube root of 54. Well, again, I'm stuck. I don't know what the cube root of 54 is, so I'm going to break that down again. Cube root of 2. Cube root of 27. I do know what the cube root of 27 is. I just wrote it down. Cube root of 27 is just 3, because 3 cubed gives me 27. So now I'm at the ends of all of my branches. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 ends of my branches. Now the steps for finding cube roots are exactly the same. The only difference is, remember, because we're cubing, pairs aren't going to help us. Triplets will, though. So what does that mean? That means I need to take the cube root of 2 times the cube root of 2 times the cube root of 2 first, and multiply that by 3. So I'm going to take this section first. Take all my roots. Well, cube root of 2 times the cube root of 2, times the cube root of 2 is the same thing as 2 times 2 is 4 times 2 is 8. It's the same thing as the cube root of 8. Well, we know what the cube root of 8 is. We just wrote that out. We also have it here. Cube root of 8 is 2. So just like when we found pairs of the same roots for square roots, we can find triplets of the same cube roots to get a whole number. This is the same thing as me cubing the cube root of 2, which just gives me 2. And let's not forget about our 3 that's here. 2 times 3 gives me 6. So the cube root of 216 is just 6, and I can check that. 6 times 6 times 6. Well, 6 times 6 is 36, and 36 times 6 is 216. Also, let's try another problem. I want you to do this one on your own. Okay, let's go with cube root of 512. Now pause the video and try this one out. All right, so if I break down the cube root of 512, let's go with the cube root of 2. 512, we've already done this, right? So 512 can be broken down into root 2, cube root of 2, and cube root of 256. Cube root of 2, 2 is a prime number. I cannot go any further with that. However, 256 is not. I can break that down. The cube root of 256 can be broken down into cube root of 2 times the cube root of 128. Just like when we were dealing with square roots, I'm keeping my roots on top of the numbers for now because I need them. It helps me decipher the difference between a factor that's a root versus a factor that is not a root. 128, I'm going to break down into root 2 and the cube root of 64. Cube root of 2 stays the same, cube root of 64. I could keep going, but I already know what the cube root of 64 is. You know what, let's keep going just for the sake of it anyway, just so you see what it looks like in case you don't know. Cube root of 2, 64 gets broken down into 32. Cube root of 2. Well, let's use a bigger number. Let's say we've got the cube root of 4 and the cube root of 8. If you remember from earlier, the cube root of 8 is just 2. Cube root of 4, I can still break down into the cube root of 2 times the cube root of, times the cube root of 2. Okay, now I'm left with a bunch of prime numbers. I cannot go any further. So what am I going to do? I'm going to circle everything. That's an end of a branch. And I'm going to group everything together. Well, lucky for me, I have 2 sets of triplets. Here's one. That should just give me 2. Here's the third one. This also just gives me 2. So now I've got 2 times 2 times 2. And I can solve that. 2 times 2 times 2. 2 cubed we've already dealt with. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8. The cube root of 512 is 8. And again, you can check that by cubing it. Okay. Now you will have situations, again, where you have uneven cube roots. Just like when we had uneven roots, we have uneven cube roots, meaning that your answer is not just going to be a whole number like 8. So what does that look like? Well, let's say I gave you the cube root of, let's change this color, the cube root of 320, cube root. And we break this down, okay? So let's say we went with cube root of, let's go bigger numbers, cube root of 10 and the cube root of 32, because 32 times 10 gives me 320. Cube root of 10 can be broken down into the cube root of 2 and the cube root of, oops, that's not a 3, cube root of 5. 32 can be broken down into the cube root of 4 and the cube root of 8. Well, 2 and 5 are prime numbers, so I'm going to leave those alone. 4 can be broken down into root 2, cube root 2, and cube root 2. And then 8, the cube root of 8 we already know is just 2. Okay, now we have a bunch of prime roots, so I'm going to circle them. And we have our whole number answers. So now we need to collect these and we need to put them together. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to specially group together these cube roots of 3. Well, cube roots of 2. Cube root of 2 times the cube root of 2 times the cube root of 2 just gives me 2. So these are all dealt with. Now, if I rewrite everything, I've got 2 times cube root of 5 times 2. Well, 2 times 2 is 4 times the cube root of 5. And that gives me 4 cube root 5. And that's my answer. So the cube root of 320 is not going to give me a whole number. It's going to give me 4 cube root 5. And again, you can check this. Okay, you can check this. How do I check this? I'm going to take 4 cube root 5 and I'm going to cube it, which means I'm going to take 4 times cube root 5 times 4 times cube root 5 times 4 times cube root 5. Now remember, it does not matter what order you multiply in. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cube roots and I'm going to multiply them together. Well, since I have a triplet of the same cube root, that just gives me 4 times 4 times 4 times 5, because cube root 5 times cube root 5 times cube root 5 gives me 5. Now I can multiply. Well, 4 times 4 is 16 times 4 times 5. 16 times 4 is 64 times 5, and 64 times 5 gives me 320. Okay, so this checks. This is the right answer. Again, they are very similar, except instead of finding doubles, we are now finding triplets. Okay. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Again, you'll be working on this where you will have to write these all out on your quiz on paper and turn that in. Thank you.